We look at the cloud I guess from the ground up, right? And we think a lot about security. Clearly we think a lot about the infrastructure, we think about the network. And then I tend to start to think about things like governance and how people are going to deal with that. So yes, we hope to provide a lot of servers in that, and we hope that's going to run, the cloud's going to run on Intel servers. And we've been consolidating those in the past few years. You know, our story around 15 to 1, so 15 servers to 1 has played out in the last 4 years. So if customers bought 15 servers 4 years ago, they're now running that workload on one server. So, you know, that's kind of where we're going with it.
How big a role would Intel play in the whole virtualization argument? Because on the one hand, virtualization reduces the number of servers, which means less chips and servers. Yeah. I mean, is this something you're cool with?
Yeah, I think so. And one of the things we have noticed in that is that customers are buying a better quality of CPU. And actually the footprint that they then surround it with is much bigger. So there's more memory and there's more disk. I think that's a bigger drive to be more aggressive on consolidation and virtual machines.
Security, as you mentioned, there is a very important thing, and a lot of companies, particularly small, medium-sized companies, are still wrestling with the idea of what's public versus private. You know, what's going to happen to my data when it's out there in the cloud? Is there a danger it could be hacked? And when you think of companies like Intel, Intel's pushing more and more technology onto the chip, systems on a chip, multimedia modules, all these different things, all happening in one little thing. Like, is security the biggest part of that now? Do you think that these are going to be like little firewall devices?
So I think security is the biggest concern that customers have. Latest survey by IDC, 70% of the audience were convinced that security was the biggest stumbling block to really taking cloud on. So security is a big part for us. We see 3 pillars that fall out of this. We see it as being federated, so the ability to share information between different clouds. We see it very much automated. I think we'll spend $2 trillion as an industry on trying to manage this stuff up to 2015. And that clearly, we've got to change that. It's too much. And then the third pillar is that it's got to be client aware. And we're not talking about your average sort of desktop or notebook client or your handheld device. This is going to be different devices. So things like televisions, things like in-vehicle entertainment. So a whole different plethora of devices that we will consume media on that we typically won't have today.
That sounds to me like identity management will come into it a lot. For example, I walk into a building, I go near a computer, I should be able to get all my YouTube videos in one place, or all my, you know, all this mad stuff that sounds scientific, but the cloud basically should be able to know where you are, not only in terms of the fact that your data is in the cloud, but other things you carry with you, your phones, other things that will identify you. Is that kind of where it's going?
So I think so, but it's going to take time. Right? All the pieces are not in place to do that today, or not integrated and in place. So to give you an example of that, I was out with about 50 headmasters 2 weeks ago, and they were asking me whether they could put their content down over an Xbox or a Wii or a PlayStation. So, you know, technically, where they've got a browser, they can access that. But the key thing I said to them is, but would you want to? And the key thing then to think about is that age-appropriate content for that individual? Is it the right content for that individual? And actually, is the individual who they say they are? So the identity management piece does play a very strong part in that.
Going back to the CIO and the idea of federated, you know, being able to basically provision. I've seen people do it on iPads and devices, and even on smartphones, provision servers for the cloud from wherever they are. They could be in Singapore and the data centers back in Dublin or something. But the ability to do that, and the ability now to interact with people like Amazon, for example, and have them provision whole new server racks for you before you may never see them, you may never even touch them, but your data will. But when you talk about federated and the ability to say, well, I'm actually going to move my services from Amazon to Microsoft or vice versa, is that kind of future far off? Because one thing I could see being a stumbling block is broadband, but the idea of being able to dynamically manage entire systems, it's incredible.
So there's a few things that
a lot of
in
questions
there, a lot of questions in there which are fantastic. Let's start with the networking one. I think the networking one's certainly one of the challenges we face. I have a customer who does a lot of bioinformatics data, and to move that around the world is a big challenge for them because the data sets are so large. The pipes are not there at a sufficiently large enough capability at a cost-effective price to move that data around. So, for example, they're taking their data, 48U high rack of storage, unplugging it, taking it via DHL across the pond, doing the work, i.e. taking the data to the processing and then bringing it back again. Now they're an extreme, and there are a couple of extremes, things like HD television, 3D television, those data sets are very large. And so they present some challenges that we see on the extreme, but others will follow. So I think the networking, people need to think very carefully about what they do. We are at the behest of the speed of light. So I think we've got some challenges to overcome there as we go forward. And we've got to get smarter about where we put the data. It leads on to where is the data. One of the big challenges, and I think this comes back to the compliance and governance question at the beginning, where if you put your data in some of the Far Eastern countries, that data is really locked down into that country. So you have to get permission from that individual if you want to use it. In Europe, it's a little bit more liberal. Where you put it around the world will be a challenge for you to manage. And you've then got to be able to report that back. Where is it, and the governance of that. So then you've asked about Google and things like Salesforce.com, the ability to move around. One of the things that a lawyer said to me just before Christmas was the tick box agreements will be a thing of the past. So when you sign up to things like Salesforce.com, which I see you recently did an article on, the tick box agreements are going to have to be thought through very carefully because, for example, where is my data? Where is my customer data? Is it in the right country? Can I use it? Right the way through to, if I want to change supplier, how do I do that? Did you back it up or did I back it up? Who had the responsibility for that data? And I now want to move it. What format's it going to come back in and how's it going to get to him or to the next supplier? So I think there are some challenges there, and those kind of agreements and licensing agreements of the data are going to be a challenge. There was one recent example with Flickr where an individual had 75,000 images stored on Flickr, and he found that somebody was getting access to them. So he wrote to them and told them the story, and they absolutely said, that's terrible, we've got to lock it down, which they did. The problem was they locked his account down to the point where they lost his data. He then took them to court, and miraculously the data was found and came back. But that's the sort of scenario, is who owns it, whose responsibility is it to back it up? That's one of the challenges I think we face.